Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special edition of Fourth and Frames. As me, Drew, and Chris welcome back to the podcast. Dave Richard from CBS Fantasy and CBS Sports. When tonight we'll be talking rankings, strategies, and developing them, as well as having a cross comparison between Dave's rankings and our own to help provide insight into players that you should be taking a look at heading into the 2023 season, for better or worse. So hey, let's hit our music and let's get it, baby. And guys, before we get started, please a reminder to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell over on YouTube, as well as check out our content and player rankings over at fantasyandframes.com. Also remember, please rate and review the Fantasy and Frames podcast wherever you listen to those podcasts. And remember to follow this show on Twitter at Fourth and Frames. And joining us today is a senior writer at CBS Sports, one of the hosts of the CBS Fantasy Football Today podcast, a recent Fantasy Sports Writer Association Hall of Fame inductee. Congratulations on that. And a supportive friend of the Fantasy and Frames family over the years. You can find him on Twitter at Dave Richard. Dave, welcome to the show. And how the heck are you, man?
I don't feel right. I don't feel 100%. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to pause the show just for a quick second. This is the Fantasy and Frames show.
Fourth and Frames, man. Fourth and Frames.
Now I'm ready.
Yes, let's go.
Let's do this.
Let's go, Dave.
It's great to talk with you guys. I love hearing other people's fantasy opinions. I don't like living in a bubble. I don't like being in the same place, hearing the same opinions from the same people that I talk to all the time. And I get that on my show. I am excited to come onto your show, your turf, and to shoot around thoughts on strategies and all sorts of opinions on players who might break out or might slump this year. I'm really excited about this. I'm really grateful for being here.
Dude, and we're grateful to have you for real. But before we get started with the heart of today's show, just want to let our listeners and watchers know that if you're watching us on Twitter and you are looking to post comments, we can't see them on that stream. So if you jump over to YouTube or Facebook and drop your comments, we can all see them and you can all participate in that level. So with that, Dave, let's get into today's first segment. We're going to pick your brain a little bit about what goes into developing a process for making rankings in the fantasy football space. You good with that, man?
I'm good with that. I don't know if I've got the most concise answer for that, but really it just comes down to, is a player going to be utilized differently than he was the year before? Could he go back to being used the way that he was 2 years before? And how a player how he'll be utilized, what does that mean for his statistical output? I've learned over the years to get away from, well, he was good last year, he must be good this year. We've seen it so many times again and again, where just because a guy was good a year ago or 2 years ago, no, we need better reasons than that for a player to be good. Unless your name is Travis Kelce. If your name is Travis Kelce, you've been good for 6 straight years, you get the benefit of the doubt. But just about everybody else does not. And, the other thing that I've really worked hard this year to get away from is not try and say, well, this guy's going to get hurt and you can't trust him in fantasy. I kind of fell into that trap last year with Christian McCaffrey. And one of the reasons why I had McCaffrey behind Jonathan Taylor was McCaffrey's been hurt a lot. I'm worried about how he'll hold up, especially in a Carolina offense. Remember, he was in Carolina at the start of last year.
Feels like a long time ago.
Yeah, it feels like it was 6 years ago, but it was like 10 months ago. I had to dial that back, and then I looked even more foolish when a high ankle sprain really impacted Jonathan Taylor last year, and that was the guy that I thought 2,000 total yards, tons of touchdowns. And everything just kind of fell apart in Indianapolis once that happened. Meanwhile, Christian McCaffrey was fine, and then he went to San Francisco, and he's been a dynamo. So really, it's a breakdown of projecting players moving forward. And sometimes I do it where I come up with a number. How many points per game is he going to average. In some cases, like I just did a projection for Darren Waller, and I couldn't project him for 17 games. I just can't. I know it's possible, but the guy's missed 6 games each of the last 2 years, and I think he's also starting to kind of come down a little bit in terms of efficiency. So what would his numbers be? And it might actually, it really doesn't matter either way because you can just project it on a per game basis. But what would his per game average be in PPR? Well, he's still over 11 points. So that makes him somebody that would be a top 8 type of fantasy tight end. Whether or not you get him every week or not is immaterial. When you do have him, he should be able to average around 11 PPR points. But that's the process for me. The last part of the process is talking with people around the league. Yeah, I don't sit here and read articles. Sometimes I talk to the people who write the articles. Sometimes I talk to the people who the articles are about. Sometimes I talk to the people who coach the people that the articles are about. And the other thing that I do, and I honestly, I should have said this first, and I'm sorry I didn't. I watch film. I watch these players from last year.
Yep.
And that's I'm going to go back to Darren Waller. I didn't watch every snap from his last 4 games last year, but I watched every route he ran in the red zone, and I watched every route he ran of like 10 plus yards downfield. And you know what I learned about him? He's still pretty fast, especially for a guy his size. And, I think he might be able to make an impact still, which is why I projected him for 11.6 in PPR instead of like 9.7, 9.8, and just completely call him a colossal bust. But it's all about marrying that information together. How did they look last year? What are people saying around the league? And what do I think his workload will be from game to game?
So, Dave, can I ask you a follow-up question on something you just touched on right there?
Yeah.
Whenever you look at a player's output from last season, do you focus more on their total points for the season, or do you like to look at the weekly output?
Weekly output, 100%.
Okay, cool. Yeah,
it's just a much better representation because sometimes let me see if I can call up an example from last year. I've got this big fancy spreadsheet that I put together basically the week after the Super Bowl. Here's a great example. Okay. If I came to this show and I told you, well, Tua Tagovailoa finished 14th in total fantasy points scored, he's not going to help you this year. Right. What's the context that I'm missing about Tua Tagovailoa?
The injuries.
Yeah. The fact that he didn't play, he missed 4 games.
Right.
He left another one early. So that's troubling. Whereas if I come to the show and say, Tua, for the games that you have him for, he could be pretty good. He finished 7th in fantasy points per game among quarterbacks last year. He could be better than that this year, and he might play more games.
It's a big difference.
Big difference between those two.
Yeah. Okay. I like it. I appreciate you clearing that up. Thank you.
Yeah, and we had a question from the comments who he wanted to know how awesome was it to talk to Justin Herbert earlier this offseason, and he wants to know if he thinks Herbert's going to be a top 5 quarterback this year.
I think Herbert's got the chance to do it, except we haven't released this video yet. So I'll tell you about it, and I'm playing spoiler here. Ooh. I asked him to make his case for why he should be the number 1 quarterback in fantasy, and he said, honestly, I can't. Because I don't care about my stats. I just care about wins, which is, if you're an NFL coach, you love to hear that.
Yeah, cookie cutter.
But damn, man, I want to win my fantasy league.
Yeah.
That's not what I want to hear.
Give us some juice, Justin.
He was very excited and very enthusiastic about getting Kellen Moore as his play caller. And remember, Kellen Moore comes from Dallas. And I can't help but think that he's going to lean heavily on Justin Herbert, just as the Chargers have been leaning heavily on Justin Herbert since he came into the league. There will be at least one person in every single fantasy football league that will say no to Justin Herbert. And it's going to be the people who had Herbert on their fantasy team last year when hold on a second, guys, he finished 9th in total fantasy points scored in 2022. That means he's good, right? Until you look and see that he averaged 19.5 fantasy points per game. That's not so good. That was 15th among quarterbacks last year. But I can't help but think that with the addition of Kellen Moore, With the addition of Quentin Johnson, that's really a big boost to the receiving core. The offensive line will be healthy, and Herbert himself will be healthy.
Right.
I would take the chance on him. This isn't taking much of a chance. I've got him ranked as QB7. I think he could easily outperform that and finish as a top 5 fantasy quarterback. I just finished writing a story for our magazine, and I moved him into the bottom of tier 2 among quarterbacks. So you can probably guess who the first 3 quarterbacks are in my tiers. Okay. Yes, you're exactly right. It's Zach Wilson. It's Davis Mills. No, you know who they are. But I put Justin Herbert into the second tier because I think he does have that upside to get you, I don't know about 28 fantasy points per game, but 25. He did that in 2021. He did that in 2020. Everything looks like it's being shifted to go around him. How about that they didn't add another running back this offseason? Tells me that they plan on riding Air Herbert here. And he was a very cool guy, and he's very into fishing because I talked to him at this fishing event that he was at for CBS, and was very into fishing.
Man, that's fun. That's fun. So, a couple things here before we get started. Number one, you kind of talked me off to, then back onto my Darren Waller ledge I've been on for 2023. So we'll see where that goes.
Okay. All right.
And then secondly, got a little bit excited about Justin Herbert there. So, we've already kind of gotten into this a little bit. We've talked about analyzing players based on scoring settings and strengths and weaknesses, a little bit of analytics and film review, as well as gut instinct. So since we've already discussed all those things, you want to get into a few questions that we have prepared for you, man?
Yeah, of course. That's why I'm here. What else are we going to talk about?
Love it. Love it. So let me start you off by asking this question. Which fantasy scoring setting do you enjoy doing rankings for the most? And which do you least like? And what exactly goes into your process for evaluating players in these particular rankings?
Oh, Rhett, I hate super complicated, too detailed minutia when it comes to scoring. Let me see if I can think of an example. I don't know if we got an email on our podcast. We recorded a podcast today, Fantasy Football Today. You can find it wherever you download podcasts or watch our stream here on YouTube, when you're done with Fourth and Frames. And somebody wants to start a league where everybody in the league can draft a quote unquote superpower. So as you draft, you can draft, I get double PPR points, and it's exclusive just to your team. Or I get to change players out. I get best ball every week with my team. Well, why don't you just draft a superpower that says I win every week? Take the whole fun out of it. Sometimes you can go too far with fantasy. I know you guys are big IDP fans. I think that there's room for a happy medium. I can't stand it when there's you start 2 IDPs in this league. Well, there's like 750 defensive players in the National Football League. Finding 2 good ones for 10 or 12 teams is a piece of cake. That doesn't help anybody. I'm in a league where we start, I think it's 2 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, 2 defensive backs, and 1 flex. I dig that. That's a perfect happy medium. But then there's people that love, well, you've got to start 11, and you have to declare 4-3 or 3-4 or nickel defense or dime defense. Like, it's too much. It's too much. We don't need all that. I really love the half PPR, half point per first down scoring. I've never been crazy about full PPR. I get why people do it. It's fun to score points. I think a point per first down, like a full point per first down, is actually great because now you're actually rewarding something that matters in the NFL. When a guy catches a screen pass and he gets tackled for a 3-yard loss, you gain points on that play. It's ridiculous. If you get a first down, that means something. I think that's important. So I like simple when it comes to scoring. I love my rosters with, if it's a 1 quarterback league, 1 QB, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 2 flex spots, not 1, 2. Let me go ahead and start extra players each week. That way, if I'm debating between 2 guys, maybe the debate's a lot easier to make if I can start 1 in my flex. Non-PPR, far more challenging than half and full PPR. And in non-PPR, 10 points from a player that's not a quarterback is pretty good. I think if I push comes to shove, half PPR, pretty simple. Give me 2 flex spots. Give me some IR spots. That should be mandatory in fantasy leagues now, fellas. If the NFL is letting players come back from the IR, we should be allowed to have IR on our benches as well. So give it to us. Give it to us with the IR.
Yeah, we had a listener right here who just watched, and he said that he just started playing IDP himself because of Fantasy and Frames, and he said Fantasy and Frames crew got him on his questions. So we appreciate you checking in every week with us, Jamie. And also, Zach, FF Chalupa Batman, wanted to ask you, what about 5 points for a tight end catching a 10-yard first down? He's asking for a friend.
5 points for a tight end catching a 10-yard first down? No, that seems a little steep.
I think that's the Scott Fish scoring he's talking about, right?
I haven't looked at it yet. I don't know what the scoring is.
Yeah, it's the 1 PPR, 1 point tight end reception, plus the yardage, plus the 1 point first down reception.
So I love Scott. I love him. He's someone that I talk to just to feel better about life. But man, he might be taking it too far with based on what you said, Chris. I don't know if I'm gonna, I love the fishbowl. It makes me mad when I don't make the playoffs in it, but the scoring could just be completely out of control.
Yeah, bully tight ends going to be the way to go, I think, this year. Just stacking all those tight ends.
Yes.
But I got a question for you based on how you structure your rankings. How much does analytics, film, gut instinct, or even just plain old opportunity for reps play and role in how you make your rankings?
Oh man, so we're talking about all the things that I mentioned earlier. Are you talking about in season, Chris?
Yeah, in season, yeah.
Okay. So really in season for me, it's mostly about who I think will get the most opportunities in a game. I will use analytics to try and figure out what type of a defense that an offense is going up against. Is it a similar defense to what they faced earlier in the year or maybe last year? And if that's the case, how did they attack it successfully? If they didn't attack it successfully, might they do the opposite of that? I usually start with how I think the game's going to go. If I think it's going to be a high scoring game, then pretty much everybody in that game is going to be ranked pretty high. Good chance to get points in those games. So like all those Chiefs Chargers games or whatever, the total is going to be 60 points or something like that. Yeah, I'm going to have at it. I'm going to load up on those players in the rankings. And then when it's like Browns, Texans, and it's windy outside, and the game looks like it's going to be 10-6. Yeah, I'm probably going to fade those guys that don't really want to take much. The running backs, maybe I'll go a little bit more on. So that's where the analytics come into play. I definitely spend a day watching film. And it's not a watch. I'm really lucky, guys. I've got access to, I can watch the coach's film split up any way I wanted to here. So if I wanted to watch all of the third down passes of Ryan Tannehill, and it just so happens that, exciting. That 4 to 7 throws went to Treylon Burks. Yeah. Well, now here's my chance to see all those throws and then see how Burks did on those throws. Was he elusive? Was he well covered every time? Any contested catches on those plays? Is there anything there that might help me project moving forward that Treylon Burks will be a bigger part of the offense? Or maybe he didn't do well in that game and we should take a big step back. It's funny. In watching Romeo Doubs earlier last year, you just knew that he was the best wide receiver on the Packers until he wasn't. And once he started to make mistakes on film, look, if I can see the mistakes from a boring looking room in Florida, then I know the coaches are seeing those same mistakes. And eventually there was a big paradigm shift in Green Bay. And for weeks in October and November, I was telling people, go pick up Christian Watson. Somebody dropped him in all your leagues. He's going to come back and have an opportunity. He's going to be the guy. He did. And that was a byproduct of watching the film and seeing this terrible Packers offense. Aaron Rodgers was scoring like exactly 20 fantasy points a week. He needed something. And the Packers had it all along. The coaches just weren't as comfortable going to Watson until they almost forced themselves to use Watson because they weren't getting anything from anybody else in their offense. So there's a lot of the film. a lot of the analytics. That stuff tends to come into play. Film first, analytics next. I try to avoid gut instinct. I know I shouldn't, but I try to avoid that. And then opportunity goes right into it with analytics and film.
Sure.
If we're catching a team, pass rush is really something that I look at. If a team can get to the quarterback, that's something that NFL offenses will adjust for.
Yeah.
But like last year, like the Chicago Bears, like their pass rush was pretty pathetic. So teams weren't scared off from them at all. And that just opened the door for offenses to do a lot of good things against Chicago. I think that'll change a little bit this year, but it won't be because of what they have up front as much as what they have in the middle of the defense.
In the middle, yeah.
And in the back. I'm sure you IDP freaks you. I am sure you've talked about Edmonds and Edwards and what they mean to Chicago. Maybe this Gibson kid, maybe he'll flash when I see him in Chicago next week. But if he might end up being their best pass rusher, and maybe he's a sleeper in IDP leagues. But I digress. It's all those things that go into it. And it seems like it's a lot that goes into it. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, there's going to be 6 quarterbacks and 15 running backs and 15 wide receivers. Those guys are always going to be toward the top. Like, they have to be on bye to not be. Like, I would be an idiot to not rank Justin Jefferson as a top 5 wide receiver each week. Those guys are easy. Yeah, it's the second level guys. It's the number 2 and number 3 receivers. It's the touchdown or bust tight ends that I've got to go and make a call on. Yeah, and I spend the whole week researching them. The analytics play a huge role. The film plays a huge role, and the reps play a huge role. And I get to a rankings conclusion usually by Thursday. I'm ready to go with my rankings, and I feel good about where they're at. And I'll tell everybody who to start and who to sit then.
Thank you. Love the process.
So let's go ahead and let's ask you about making a call, because there have been some rumors about DeAndre Hopkins perhaps going to Tennessee. If he does go to Tennessee, does that change your perspective on Ryan Tannehill any?
No, it turns him from a terrible low-end number 2 fantasy quarterback to a middle-of-the-pack number 2 fantasy quarterback. You might be a little more interested in him in super flex leagues and 2 QB leagues because he's got such a great target in Hopkins. And Hopkins is another guy I talked to this offseason at that same event with Justin Herbert. And he seems ready for a change, and he looks to be in good shape. And I've always liked his game. Mm-hmm. And I'm positive that whatever quarterback is throwing to him will gravitate toward him. But I would hate for it to be Tennessee, because I that's a team that likes to run the ball a lot, and they're going to keep doing it as long as Derrick Henry can do it. I wouldn't be that excited about Ryan Tannehill if he's got DeAndre Hopkins, and I wouldn't be that excited about Hopkins. I moved him down in my rankings a little bit today just because it's taking him so darn long to find a team to sign with. I would struggle with him. I think I'd put him behind DJ Moore. The upside for Christian Watson, I'd consider that versus DeAndre Hopkins. PPR might make that decision easier for me. But now we're talking about him closer to round 5. Whereas if he went to like Buffalo or Kansas City, I know there's going to be a target crunch there. That dude's a round 3 pick still, especially in PPR.
So I got a follow-up question to what Chris was talking about real quick before I get into our next question.
Okay.
Do you have, for the in-season rankings, whenever you're building those, do you have a cutoff for whenever you start looking at trends during the season of like, we want to target this defense against running backs or this defense against tight ends because of the fantasy points on a weekly basis they give up? It's like, I mean, if Houston happens to have to play Tennessee in week 1, and we know what Derrick Henry does to Houston every single time he plays them, like, of course, in week 2, it's going to look like Houston might be a defense to target against the running back. But so how many weeks into the season do you typically wait to start looking at those trends?
Okay, so first of all, those trends that you're talking about, Drew, they change dramatically based on injuries and based on surprise things happening. Remember when the Lions were rolling last year, their run defense was outstanding. And then all of a sudden they go to Carolina, and Deontay Foreman, of all people, just absolutely busts them up. That was a frustrating game. So those things tend to, change pretty quickly. where, for 2 or 3 weeks, the defense looks great. And then the defense gets figured out. You've heard the term, it's a copycat league. Absolutely. Yep. Coaches love to do that. They'll see what another team did to win, and they will attack it until the defense has solved it. And sometimes defenses just don't solve it, and Texans run defense is an example of that. I will lean on my projections for defenses. And yes, I do projections for defenses through the first couple of weeks of the season, only gravitating away from that when I see something that's totally unforeseen in the first 2 weeks of the season. So, for example, I just got done talking about the Bears defense and how I don't think their pass rush is going to be particularly good this year. Well, let's say in week 1 against Green Bay, they sacked Jordan Love 8 times and they just look ferocious. And then in week 2, who do they play in week 2? They play Tampa. Okay. Another good offensive line. And in week 2, that pass rush sacks Baker Mayfield another 8 times. I know. How could Baker Mayfield be sacked 8 times? He's a former first-round pick. Okay, whatever. Nice bandana, kid. That's the type of thing that would surprise me and go, okay, I was wrong about this defense. They're going to be pretty good. And now their matchups against Kansas City in week 3, okay, it's not going to scare me then. But against Denver in week 4 and the Commanders in week 5, that could be a defense that could cause some trouble for the quarterbacks in those games. So maybe in those matchups, especially if they did get to Mahomes in week 3, just of course that would be bad for Russell Wilson. And that would impact everybody in the Broncos passing game. And by then there'll be stats anyway about a defense being good. So really the first 2 weeks of the season, I want to see if I'm right or wrong on a certain defense. And once I realize that I'm wrong, I'll change my tune, rank accordingly. And if I'm right, I just keep ranking the way that I have been.
Okay, very good. So whenever you're in the middle of a draft, do you prefer to use a top 200 list, or do you like to lean on your positional rankings? And then talking about positional rankings, do you build tiers into those as well?
Yeah, I write a tiers article every year for our magazine, and then every week during the preseason, they're updated so that people can take them to their drafts. And I don't know if anybody was building tiers as long ago as I was and posting them to the internet. So it's been like close to 15 years of tiers. And it's such an easy tool to use where you could literally I could take your tiers, Drew. I could take your tiers and I could say, all right, you're wrong on this guy. I like this guy better. I like that guy better. Do that for each position. Bam, done. I go into my draft. And when I see a tier starting to end up and I have the opportunity to take the last guy in a tier, I know it's the right pick. And that type of stuff is already built into the top 200, rather, the rankings I have for top 200. But eventually you get to a point in a draft where you say, all right, I don't need a certain position anymore, but I do need this other position. And then I'll look at the positional rankings then, pair it with the tiers. Is there a guy, maybe 2 guys I have to make a decision on that are last in a tier group? Okay, there are. The one that's ranked higher is the one I like better. That's the one I'm going to go and take. And I want to catch that tier before the drop down to the next group, which could be far worse for my fantasy team. And I don't want to let a guy like that, a good player who's in a higher tier, slip away off my team so that I'm stuck drafting and using, Austin Hooper or Adam Troutman in one of my fantasy games.
Right.
So, yeah, that's
a lot
awesome.
of questions about philosophy and rankings to start.
Well,
this is very different.
Well, you're the
This
man.
is
That's why. So, look, let's just go ahead. I want to go ahead and ask Chris a question. So, Chris, let's go ahead and this offseason, we've kind of been going through rankings, trying to figure out who's going to be what. Has there been anybody that you've come across that you've had particular difficulty ranking this offseason? And why, man?
Yeah, it's not just one player in particular. It's a position as a whole, and that's the running backs. When you look at the way teams are structured with committees, I mean, outside the top 3 with maybe Christian McCaffrey and then Jonathan Taylor, then who knows behind him? Even Christian McCaffrey in San Francisco isn't the safest bet with all the factors in that offense that they have going on. If Trey Lance is the starter for the 49ers, is he going to cut into some of the rushing role of CMC and then as a fantasy asset, how much does that play into his ultimate capabilities of scoring fantasy points week in and week out? Taylor, the same thing. He got that new quarterback in Anthony Richardson, a quarterback that we all know is going to run the ball. How much does that play into me ranking Jonathan Taylor? There's not so much situations where there's this bell cow running backs that are carrying the ball 75% or more of the time, heavy usage running backs on the goal line. It's few and far between. So as a player, I don't have one. I mean, I could probably pick Nick Chubb, Ramondre Stevenson. These guys can be that Josh Jacobs of last season where you have them at the back end of your RB1 rankings, but could finish as that top 3 running back in a whole. So for me, it's that group as a whole that I have trouble ranking, especially outside of maybe the top 3. It just seems like there's a big clog of guys that you can move around from RB3. You can move the RB4 back up to the RB12 and be fine with it. So that, for me, that's my approach. Drew, how about you? Is there a player or maybe like a position that you can see that you're kind of struggling with?
So it's a couple running back groups, the Miami Dolphins and the Chicago Bears, those 2 running back groups. I know I want a piece of it, but I have no idea how these guys are going to end up slotting out. Like I love Khalil Herbert. I wrote a Dynasty buy piece on him prior to the NFL draft and prior to the Deontay Foreman signing. But then I also like Deontay Foreman, and they brought him in, and they brought in Roschon Johnson on day 3. And then Miami, they brought Jeff Wilson, they brought Raheem Mostert back, but then they put Devin A-Chain in that offense, and you have to think his speed could pair well with what Mike McDaniel likes to do. So it's like I want pieces of both of those running back rooms, but I have no idea how to sort them out. So I think those 2 running back rooms have been the ones I've struggled with the most so far.
And Dave, what about you, man? Anybody?
What have I been struggling with?
Yeah, what you've been struggling with?
I don't know if I'm necessarily struggling with anything like as far as like a general position thing. Like I totally get where you guys are coming from with the running backs. Number one, that tells me that you guys are going to take wide receivers in round 1. Sure thing. You're going to bypass that running back position. You're going to kick the can to round 2. And if there's a running back that you like that's still out there in round 2, you might take them. But otherwise, you're getting ready to build toward 0 RB, which is okay. It's fine, especially given like the top 15-ish type of wide receivers. It might be a little bit less than that. Maybe that's how I'll answer this question. I'm trying to find wide receivers who can finish in the top 10 that aren't ranked in the top 10. Okay. And like, I got a little bit of a problem with T. Higgins because his best games have normally been when there hasn't been any Jamar Chase on the field. Right. Calvin Ridley, absolutely one of my favorite guilty pleasures as far as players go. How will he adapt? It sounds like he's motivated and ready to go in Jacksonville, and I've watched the same clips you have. Is he going to get enough of a target share to separate from the other pass catchers in an offense that did a really good job of spreading the ball around last year? Can Chris Olave take the next step? Can Keenan Allen stay on the field and continue putting up 15 PPR points per game? Or is he going to get is he going to have a target drain because of Quentin Johnson being there? I'm having a little bit of a struggle with wide receivers. Let's call it wide receiver 12 through, I don't know, man. It could go well into the 30s, where I want to be sure to have definitive opinions on every single one of these guys. And the way that I have it ranked now is that T. Higgins is 12th because I'm looking to find that next wide receiver that I can look at and say, all right, that guy can get me more than 15 PPR points per week. Now, if I can find that guy, I'll happily put him ahead of T. Higgins. But until I do, I can't do it because I think T. Higgins can still get you close to that average over the balance of a season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm struggling with that right now, too. Once I get outside the top 12, I've got a tier from 13 to 21 and then another tier from 22 to 30. It's tough trying to figure those middle guys out.
Well, that tells me not only are you going to go 0 RB, you're going to be in contention for Travis Kelce with your first round pick. and you might be open. You might be daring enough to take a tight end and a quarterback with 2 of your first 4 picks. And usually that's been a problem for building good rosters. You usually have to pick between one or the other.
Exactly.
You know what? If you look at those receivers late and you say these guys are all kind of the same, you're probably not going to care what their names are. You're just going to hope to get players from a specific tier and say, okay, I'm going to take my best shot on starting the year with Drake London and Tyler Lockett, because I went heavy on other positions that just seem and feel a lot safer and a lot more explosive. That's what that tells me.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. I typically do try to get one of either a tight end or a quarterback early, but I try to stay away from taking them both. But the way that these elite quarterbacks have been playing and putting up fantasy numbers the last couple of years, I'm thinking the late round quarterback strategy that I used to go after, maybe I need to reverse my thinking a little bit, because like Jalen Hurts and Mahomes of the world, if they fall to round 3, that's really tempting for me. Now, round 2, I still can't do it. No. I typically try to stay like my ideal world is maybe I get somebody like Fields or Lamar in round 5. That's kind of my sweet spot. Even the 3rd round is still a little rich for me, but if I can land Lamar or Fields in the 5th round, at that point, I think I'll pull the trigger.
And I'm worried that you won't be able to get them. Like there will be, I think the demand for quarterbacks, especially those top tier guys, I think it'll be greater than ever, which means in a lot of home leagues, you're going to see multiple quarterbacks going round 1. And the guys that you're hoping to get in round 5, they might go in round 3. I mean, you're going to have to draft with a bunch of fantasy dorks like everybody else on this show. And you have to hope that we all feel the same way of that. Yeah, we'll just wait on quarterbacks. A few years ago, that was the right thing to do. In 2020, there were 12 quarterbacks that averaged 24 or more fantasy points per game. That's 6 point per passing touchdown leagues. Last year, there were only 4. So
crazy.
That's where I had a little bit of a challenge building out tiers for quarterbacks, because I knew I had the big 3, and I won't be goofy about it. It's Mahomes, it's Hurts, it's Josh Allen. And then the next 4 after that, put me down for Burrow, Fields, Lamar, Herbert. Yeah. And then the next tier after that, it almost feels like only a 3-man tier with Trevor Lawrence, who feels safe. And I like Calvin Ridley. So I think there can be some modest improvement from him. But then there's just all that unbelievable upside with Anthony Richardson as a runner and Tua Tagovailoa as a thrower. I know what the downsides are with those guys, and I know I'm probably going to have to take another quarterback with them. But there isn't a lot to get excited about when you look at Dak, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins. Cousins is like 21 fantasy points per game every single year. You can set your watch to it. I think Geno Smith is legit, and I think everything that Seattle's done this offseason, points to him having maybe even a better year than he had last year. And those are all quarterbacks you can wait on. And so waiting on a quarterback isn't a problem. Yes, you can find a starter, but you might be giving up 9 points per week.
Right.
By waiting. And that's tough to overcome. That is hard to overcome. So I feel like there's just a much bigger gap between the elite guys and the less elite guys. And it wasn't quite there. It definitely wasn't there as much in 2021. And it just felt like there were too many that were good in 2020. So I'm not sure which way it's exactly going to go this year, but I'll put me down as an over on the number of quarterbacks that average 24 fantasy points per year in 2023. If that number is 4.5, because last year there were 4, I'm taking the over. I think there could be as many as 7 or 8.
Yeah, I'd smash the over on that too. And a guy you mentioned, Geno Smith, as late as he's going right now, he's one of the reasons why I don't want to take a quarterback early, because I don't understand how he had the season he did last year. And then they add JS into the offense, and he's still going that late. And so every mock draft I've done so far, I see him sitting there in the late rounds. And in the mock drafts where I take a quarterback early and then he's there late in a 1 quarterback mock, I'm kidding.
It's the damnedest thing. The Seahawks trade Russell Wilson, and then they realize that it's okay to throw the football. And now it's like they're going all in on it, because it's more than just JSN. JSN is there because I don't think that they liked what they got in the middle of the field. So they couldn't have liked what they got from their pass catchers not named Metcalf and Lockett. But I think teams kind of figured out, all right, we're just going to take away the perimeter. And, Lockett's a little bit older, and he kind of goes to the ground a little bit easier once he has the ball and he runs out of room. I think JSN is the change-up for them. That's going to make it a lot harder for defenses to defend the pass. And then both of the running backs they drafted are guys who can catch the football. And so I wonder if obviously they're going to take away from Kenneth Walker, and he won't get crazy playing time. And Charbonnet might even steal some short yardage goal line carries from Walker. This is an example of film. Go back, and if you could do it, I wish you would. Watch the carries that Kenneth Walker had inside the 10 last year. I think he had 10 of them, and I think he only scored twice. And there were lanes that he missed. And this dude, it's strange, he didn't miss that much at Michigan State, and now he's missing. Maybe it was just because he was more athletically gifted than other defenses on the field at Michigan State. I couldn't tell you. But Seattle sees something, and I think they see Geno Smith as a guy that they're willing to build around, and that offensive line will be better. So that's the kind of thing that you can actually build a draft strategy around. You found a player that you think will be better than he was last year. You want to get that guy on your team, and you could say, okay, well, I'm going to let other people in my league, obviously you're going to pivot if Patrick Mahomes is there in round 3. But if he's not, if he goes way earlier, you can say, this is cool. I got my guy. I can always end my draft with Geno Smith, and I'll feel good about him as my starting quarterback. And it's because of all the things that we talked about. And it has very little to do with what he did last year. Okay, it's easy to say, yeah, he had 21 fantasy points per game last year. He should be about as good. Well, there's a lot more going for him than that in Seattle. And that's the kind of thing that fantasy managers need to look for.
And you mentioned running backs, and there was a question that came up in the comments in terms of designing your rankings around unsigned running backs like Leonard Fournette and Ezekiel Elliott. Where are those guys fitting into your rankings as of now? I
mean, they're really not. Dallas has had months to sign Zeke. They haven't done it. I don't. Does Zeke have to play? I mean, he's probably got money that sets him up for life. Why would he sign a 1-year, $1 million deal with anybody? Maybe he wants to wait and see if somebody needs him. Why would he want the wear and tear as an older player who doesn't have the same explosiveness? Is he definitely going to be 10 touchdowns next year, no matter where he goes? I don't think so. Same thing with Leonard Fournette. That dude's gotten paid. He's probably set for life. Of course, these guys want to, have one more shot at winning a Super Bowl, especially Zeke. He hasn't done it. Fournette has. They might pop up at some point during the year, but I'm not all that interested in drafting them now. I may dabble with Fournette late in a best ball because he's young enough where I think he could still. Let me see. Now it makes me want to go and look up his age, but he might be just barely young enough.
28, I think.
Something in the tank. I got him at 28.
28, yeah.
Yeah, so that was a good call. And Zeke's also 28, but it feels like it's like 31 because he's been around. But look, like they're going to get looks. We know Fournette can catch the football.
Yeah,
someone's going to need a running back, and they're not going to want to give up a draft pick to go and get one. So maybe a late round pick for Fournette. Zeke doesn't excite me.
Yep, I like that answer. Zeke doesn't excite me that much either. His bank account excites me, like you mentioned, but as a fantasy asset, not so much. Drew, welcome back. We lost you there for a little bit, brother. But I got a question for you, Drew, with the excitement surrounding running back Javonte Williams and the amount that continues to grow, the hype, fueled by the quotes from head coach Sean Payton and positive reports from OTAs. Despite his current ranking in the mid to top end RB3 range, let's envision a scenario where Williams receives a clean bill of health. Week 1, he's ready to go. He's ready to hit the ground 10 months out from the injury that he sustained in October when week 1 does come along. But in such circumstances, how significantly, Drew, would you consider his ranking? And can Williams transcend expectations and solidify his position among the fantasy football elite?
I don't know about the elite, at least this season. With him coming back from that injury, Sean Payton's history of using multiple running backs, bringing in Samaje Perine, I'm I don't know about elite, but I still like the talent, and I do think the offense will be better. But I would be a little bit hesitant still to push him up too much. But I mean, definitely, if we get a clean bill of health, I would move him up. But the J.K. Dobbins experience from last year has me a little bit scared up to this point. So, Dave, I'm curious to hear what your outlook is for Javonte, because that's another guy I'm struggling with.
Well, let's start with what we know about him. Even when he was at North Carolina, he was splitting reps.
Yep.
So he split reps at UNC. He gets drafted to Denver. Melvin Gordon's there. He's splitting with him too. So those are two separate, unique coaching staffs that came to the conclusion that Javonte Williams couldn't handle a full workload all by himself. And I can't tell you like how many games in college he split evenly as far as touches goes with Michael Carter, or how many he split evenly last year with Melvin Gordon. That would take work. That probably doesn't mean anything right now. What have the Broncos' actions showed us this offseason? They went out and they made a beeline to Samaje Perine.
Mm-hmm.
That's a guy who's excellent on passing downs. He's a good blocker. He's an even better receiver. In a pinch, he can be your lead running back. We've seen him as fantasy managers be successful running the football and getting a ton of work doing that. I am certain that Sean Payton sees the exact same things. And so why would he put his young running back who's coming off of an ACL in a position where he's going to have to carry the ball 15 times or, carry the ball 12 times and catch the ball 3 or 4 times? He can take work off him with Perine, no problem. And Perine, he'll sign for whatever the Broncos gave him, but I'm sure he wanted the chance to play and to be more of a option for an offense than what he was in Cincinnati, because he almost never played on running downs in Cincinnati. He was their 2-minute guy and he was their passing downs guy. And if they were losing late, he was the one on the field more often than Joe Mixon. Now I'm kind of curious, like, how did Perine do on short yardage carries? Is it going to be him? Is it going to be Javonte? Javonte's got a lot of work to do. He's got to impress this coaching staff that didn't draft him. And he's got to do it coming off of an ACL. No guarantee that he's going to be in the right kind of shape. Can you guys tell me an NFL player who came back from a torn ACL and looked amazing the following year? I know one.
AP?
That's
AP.
The one.
Yeah, but he's a freak, though. He's a freak athlete.
Okay, and so I don't think Javonte Williams is the same type of
No, sir.
No offense. I don't even know if Breece Hall is the same kind of
Just
low-key saying it. But it's hard to find those guys and it almost seems like, okay, they come back from the ACL and then there's a stumbling block. Think about Chris Godwin last year.
Yeah.
And the numbers go down for a little bit. And then right around mid-season, okay, they start to take off and that stumbling block is gone. I think if you draft Javonte Williams, you just have to be so patient with him. You cannot, you can't, sell low on him. You've got to hold him pretty much for the whole season. And man, I don't know how excited I would be to do that, knowing that he's probably not going to catch as many passes as I would, as I think he will, or as much as I would want him to. And I don't even know how he'll do in short yardage goal line.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious. Now, I want to go and look at that. I think I can do this while I'm on the air with you guys.
Yeah, I think it's going to be such a succulent, for lack of a better term, rushing offense, because they invested in that offensive line. Did the Denver?
Well, they
Broncos.
had to.
Yeah,
Russ didn't trust him.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you guys watched him.
Yeah,
he looked like he was a total mess out there. He was scared to death of getting hit.
Yeah, and then the first 4 weeks of their schedule is just packed solid with, I think in your article there, you wrote down, I think it was maybe 10 days ago, you mentioned it, how prevalent those first 5 weeks outside of the Commanders that their schedule is for running backs. So I'm hoping Javonte Williams kind of comes back maybe week 2, gets into the fold running, but Samaje Perine is a guy that I'm targeting at least late in my drafts, just because he's a guy that if he goes off those first few weeks, I might be able to dish him off to the Javonte Williams owner, bring Javonte Williams back to me, and hope that he comes on and kind of bees that league winner that finds his footing late into the season.
I love that thinking. Here's where I would go with it. I'm not drafting Javonte Williams. Let's wait until the midseason, right?
Yep.
Let's wait till then to go and get him in trade. Because just because I won't sell low on him doesn't mean the schmucko that took him in round 4 isn't ready to say goodbye to him after he stinks. Okay, here's the trivia question. Who's had more carries inside the 5 over the last 3 years? And Javonte's only been in the league for 2 years. Javonte Williams or Samaje Perine?
This feels like a setup where the answer is probably Samaje Perine.
Is that your answer?
Final answer.
It's Javonte. He's had 12.
Okay.
On 12 carries inside the 5, he scored 3 times. Not great. That's
Right.
Get you paid in
25%.
baseball. Get you paid in baseball.
Okay. Only 5 carries for Samaje over the last 3 years. I would assume that those would be in games that Mixon didn't play, but that's just an assumption. Scored twice. Neither of these guys have been particularly great at scoring inside the 5. Makes me a little bit worried about what does Denver do when they're inside the 5. If one guy can't get it done and the other guy can't get it done, is there somebody else on the roster who can get it done? Now we have to look at their depth chart and try and figure that out. And this is the whole riddle of fantasy football and whether or not there's anybody that's like is Tony Jones really that guy? I'm going to say no. You know, if they had hung on to Latavius Murray, I bet he would have been that guy. And then that would have been a whole big mess that we'd be dealing with the Denver backfield. I think I think the thing that I'm trying to say is don't draft Javonte Williams. Try and get Samaje Perine in a PPR league at a decent value. Otherwise, maybe not draft any Broncos at all.
It's a pretty fair strategy.
Yeah.
Just kind of wipe out that team.
Right. So staying on the topic of running backs, I noticed that we have similar gaps between the 2 first-round rookie running backs from the NFL draft. We each have Bijan at 4, and then I have Gibbs at running back 18. You have him at running back 16. And I've been struggling with this lately because, given the investment that each team made in these players in the NFL draft, I'm starting to wonder if my gap should be as wide as it is in my ranking. So I'm comfortable with where I have Bijan. So my question for you is, in terms of where you have Gibbs, is this mostly because of the competition for touches with David Montgomery, or is there more to that?
First of all, I don't like using the draft capital excuse as to why.
Okay.
I especially don't like it on day 3 players. A lot of coaches, and Pete Carroll is notorious for this. Once the player is in the building, that's when they evaluate him and they find out what his role is going to be. You guys remember Chris Carson, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I invested heavily in Rashad Penny with that first-round draft capital.
I tried to help you with that. Carson was such a good fit for their offense and what they wanted to do. That's where film comes into play. Just watching him play, it was Oklahoma State, I believe. He was really, really good in that one-cut type of offense, and he packed a punch when he ran. When they realized in Seattle that he was good, and then especially when they knew that they didn't have Rashad Penny around, it was a no-brainer that Chris Carson was going to be a guy who was a big fan. Carson might have been there before Penny was, but I remember they drafted Penny. Carson was there. They drafted Penny. Everybody got away from Chris Carson. Penny got hurt. Not everybody went rushing back to Chris Carson. But that fit matters. And a lot of coaches think that way. So like Jahmyr Gibbs, it's great that they spent a first-round pick on him. But if he shows up at camp and he doesn't look like the Jahmyr Gibbs that they drafted, that's going to mean good things for David Montgomery. Where I came out on this is literally the first thing I'm going to say about Jahmyr Gibbs every time I talk about him for the next 3 months. If DeAndre Swift averaged 14 PPR points per game with just 5 games of 11 touches last year, what's Gibbs going to do? All right. Now, especially if he's more available, like the Lions coaching staff soured on DeAndre Swift because he kept getting hurt.
Right.
And he struggled when he did play hurt. Well, Gibbs is fresh, and hopefully he doesn't have those same injury concerns and they don't overwork him too quickly. And that coaching staff, like, they seem to fall in love with him. I know I said don't focus too much on the draft capital, but they clearly had a much different feeling about him than maybe, all the other draft nicks that were out there that said, yeah, he's worth a first-round pick, but not a, first half of the first round type of pick. So right. They seem to be just glowing about him. I think he can get to that same. It was 13.7 PPR points that Swift averaged last year, and he only had 5 games with 11 plus touches. How many games do you think Gibbs is going to have with 11 or more touches this year? Over, under 5?
I would take the over.
Yeah, I'm going over.
Me too.
Yep.
And so if Swift is getting it, then Gibbs is really going to have to step on his you-know-what in order to not get to 13.7 full PPR points per game. I think it's easier to make the argument for Montgomery over Swift or over Gibbs rather in non-PPR.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that Montgomery is going to be used very similarly to Jamal Williams with the added bonus that he could also catch passes.
Yeah.
But Montgomery is also bully back who can handle short yardage goal line work. I don't think we'll ever see Gibbs there. In fact, we've rarely seen Gibbs there over the course of his college career.
Right.
Working in that type of situation. So why would the Lions, who just learned their lesson about these passing down backs with DeAndre Swift, why would they go and ruin another guy by putting Jahmyr Gibbs in a situation where he could take on extra hits when they've got David Montgomery? And then the last thing on this, before they drafted Gibbs, man, you could still find videos on the internet of Dan Campbell just raving about David Montgomery. You know, he had a coach's show and they preview each game. They'd show some coaches film, and every time David Montgomery came on, Dan Campbell was going nuts. And so obviously they've got a high opinion of both of these running backs. And this is a team that likes to run the football. And they don't have Jameson Williams for the first 6 games of the season. I kind of think that both these running backs can help you out quite a bit, get off to a good start in fantasy.
I agree.
Good,
Man,
that
that's
makes me
awesome.
feel better about it.
It does.
Oh, Dave, that's awesome stuff. So first, with that, on behalf of Chris and Drew, Dave, we want to thank you again for joining us today on the latest episode of Fourth and Frames. So look, the stage is yours. Please let the people watching or listening know what you're currently working on and what you have coming out in the near future.
So I'm working on the CBS Sports Fantasy Football Preview Magazine. I have a copy of last year's edition right here. It is not going to look like this one, but we did get a good cover boy with Jamar Chase. It'll be on newsstands everywhere at some point in July. Follow my Twitter account at Dave Richard on Twitter to get more information. And we are doing live streams all the time on CBS Sports right here on YouTube and on CBS Sports HQ. That's our 24/7 home for sports, news, highlights, and smart analysis. If you want to be the smartest guy among your friend group to talk about what's happening in the sports world, spend 30 minutes every morning watching CBS Sports HQ. It's online. Any device that gets Wi-Fi can get CBS Sports HQ, and it's free. You don't have to give your email address. You don't have to give a credit card. We're not trying to gyp you. We're just trying to make you a better, smarter fan. The next time there's breaking news in sports, give us a shot. CBSSportsHQ.com.
Awesome, man. And so another question for you. Will you be in the Scottish Bowl this year? And
Yes.
How do you select a division? And if so, what is it?
I am in the Chiquita division.
Ooh.
Yes.
What draft slot did you go with?
I don't even remember.
He's got the banana.
You got the
Got a banana.
That's awesome.
I've got a banana. I don't know. I don't know what draft spot I have. I picked the division. I want to say 6, so that
Right
I'm right in the middle.
Yeah.
Is that third round reversal? Man, that damn third round reversal. So
That's
if I'm in the middle of the round, it can't get me.
Yeah.
I know it'll be a little bit behind in third round, but I'll be okay with it. I love playing in the fishbowl, but now I got to worry about this scoring system, you guys.
Yeah.
It's going to be different. Did Scott go a little bit too far? We'll find out.
I'll say this. There's a lot going on with that scoring system. But really quickly, guys, before we sign off, just a heads up for all of our listeners and those who are watching to check out our YouTube shorts that feature me, Drew, and Chris's top 10 rankings at every offensive position in half PPR, as well as seeing our full rankings over at our website, fantasyandframes.com. And also make sure that you watch and read our latest Dynasty and Redraft target profile videos and any articles we have coming out in the near future on our YouTube channel and also at our website. So before we let this good man go, Chris, do you have any last questions for Dave?
Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson?
What's the format?
We'll go full PPR.
Jefferson.
Thank you.
I might go. I don't think I might. I think I will go Chase and half and
half.
Okay. Yeah, I really think it's that close between those two.
Yeah. I see it like that as well.
So this was a great show, man. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk with three brilliant fantasy minds, and not a fantasy mind that's like crazy about the Commanders. I don't know if you can trust those guys. Don't know if you can trust those guys to get good fantasy advice from. Some of them, yes, but some of them, not so sure.
Not so much.
I'm sure you have nobody particular in mind with that statement, but
no, none at all. None at all.
But
name begins with a J. Maybe it does. I don't know.
I don't have any further questions, but I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on. You were very kind with your time today.
It was so much fun. It's always good to talk. Good to get your opinions on the record too.
Absolutely.
And yes, and so once again, we thank you for your time, and for all of our watchers, thanks again for joining us today, folks. Stay blessed. Have a wonderful day. As always, we out.